All right, welcome back. So now we're on to the last modeling task of the training series here. We're going to be modeling the package. So if we refer back to the image that we were provided from the client, is we have this Fruit Bites package here. So it's a long, sort of slender, square package that we're going to be recreating that has lots of curves on it. So this should be fairly simple for us to model in Modo like this. So we're going to use this element here, this Photoshop rendering, as a backdrop, and then we're going to model to this. So, and keep in mind that this is simply a product pitch, so things aren't going to be manufactured from this, but we want to give the image an air of believability. So we're going to add in some small details that are going to make it more convincing as a realistic sort of package. So let's jump in and start doing this in Modo here. So the first thing we want to drop in order to model from is a backdrop item. So let's add in a backdrop. And the way you add an image to a backdrop is with the item selected here in the properties panel, we're going to go down to image and we're going to load an image from the palette here. So in the Fruit Bites content backdrops, we're going to load the package front comp image on there. So it's going to come in pretty large so that we have a point of reference. I'm going to go into the default mesh item here, and I'm just going to add the unit cube. So you do that by holding down the control key and then just clicking on the cube. So that is directly visible in the front view. So let's go in here to wireframe to see that, and then we're going to go to the front view. So we want to scale this image down so that it's going to represent the size that we're going to end up modeling. So go select the backdrop image again, and we're going to scale this pixel size down to something smaller. So we want these black lines to just sort of hug the outside of the cube size. So if you hold down the control key and then move the little slider, you can actually get a finer little representation there. So I have mine at 2.044 millimeters for the pixel size. And that seems to get me the size that I want. So the next thing I want to do is I want to put this base here at the 0 line, the ground. So let's adjust the transparency first to 50%. And then I can reduce the brightness a little bit on that so it's less obtrusive. And then we're just going to move that up some. So that is just resting on the ground. So the black line kind of represents sort of an outline. So I guess I'm putting this so that the black line is just right below that ground line. So, and then I'm going to go into perspective mode here and then grab my W key, and then I'm going to move this way off into the distance. And I like to do this because it kind of keeps the image off out of your way when you're actually modeling, but then when you jump back into the front view, it's still perfectly visible. So I'm going to hit Q to drop that. And now to make sure we don't accidentally make any changes to our backdrop item, I'm going to lock it. So that's right mouse button click and then select the lock unlock option. But the thing that happens when you do this is now you can no longer sort of turn it off or hide it. So what I do is I just select my backdrop items, one or more, and then you can hit just Control G to group that. Doesn't have to have more than one object, and then we can rename this backdrop. And then that will allow us to toggle that visibility on and off. All right, so let's go back into our cube here. And I'm just going to delete this initial cube that we created now. Now we're going to create a new cube. And I deleted the whole item because we're in items mode. So let's get into polygons mode and hit N to create a new mesh item. And then let's start dragging out a cube here. And then we can jump into our front view by Control Spacebar and select our front. And I'm just going to sort of drag this kind of to the top. Right there at the base, we're going to make that at 0, 0. So make sure the minimum on Y is set to 0. And I want the size to be 1 meter. So I'm going to give that an X and a Z size of 1. And then we want the 3 segments on the X and the Z. And then we want 6 segments on the Y. Should get us what we need. So make it about 900 here, 900 millimeters. So if we look at that in perspective mode, I think that gives us what we want. We're going to be making some adjustments, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but I think that's our start off size, 1.8, and then 1 and 1 meter with 363 for our segments. So Q to drop that tool, and then we're going to hit the Shift Tab key for that to turn that to a Catmull-Clark subdivision. So let's go back into our front view and start getting that shape that we want. Is this centered? We may not have been careful about centering that. So we can center that on the X and center that on the Z just to make sure. So that looks like we're centered now. So now I'm going to select these polygons right here. Of course, it helps to be in polygons mode. So let's select these polygons. Now I want to scale these polygons so that they get that curve from the bottom of the package. So in order to do that, I want to do that from the origin. And I'm going to get my fall off. And I want to set that to linear. And then we get our scale tool here. And then on the scale tool, you want to make sure that the linear fall off is set to ease out. All right, so I think we got that shape good. So let's drop that and escape to drop the action center and the fall off. So let's jump back into perspective view here, and I'm going to select this topmost polygon here, right on the top, and then we're going to switch back into our front view, and then I'm going to drag this upwards to here. And that almost gives us the shape that we want. So I'm going to click that to right about there. And then I think I'm going to select this loop by double clicking on it and then using the move tool to kind of adjust that down a little bit. So let's go back to polygon and adjust this up some. Like I said, this doesn't have to be exactly perfect. I don't think we're going to be able to make it exactly perfect. There we go. That looks better. All right, so let's look at that in shaded view. So that is our shaded package. So I think what we're going to want to do is, since this is a simplified base of this, we're going to copy and we're going to paste this into a new mesh for now. And further down the road, we're going to be doing some simulation. We're going to be filling our package with the little fruit bites themselves, and this will act as a collision object for us. So we don't have to use our full-blown detailed geometry for that. We just need a container for holding that that's simple. So I'm going to call this collision. And I'm just going to move this down here at the bottom. We don't need that for right now, so just turn it off. These other elements off, if I can click correctly. And then let's go ahead and save our object. I'm going to go to Save As, and we're going to go to Video 11, and I'm going to save this as the Package 01 file, so you can see exactly what it is that I'm working on here. So now the next part we're going to do, if we reference back to our image here, our fruit bites, it's a two-part package. So it has sort of a green plastic top and then this clear base on the bottom of it. So let's go ahead and break this into its little constituent pieces, I suppose. So if we look at this from the front again in the wireframe display, we're going to add a loop inside of here that sort of represents where those two pieces are going to break apart. So I will just select a couple of polygons and hit Alt-C to enable my loop slice, which is under the mesh edit here, Alt-C, and then just clicking in the viewport. We certainly don't want 10 count, so we're going to move that to 1, and we want that to be free. So you see, as you move that, we want to get that edge right there on that little seam between the top and the bottom. And we want to turn on this preserve curvature there. So that'll make sure that nice little subtle curve that we have in there is going to be retained. So I think that is the line that we're going to want. So just to make this easier to see, we're going to give this material. So this is going to be called cap. We're going to give that a nice green color. And then we're going to take our selection and we're going to invert that. And then we're going to call this the base. And then that's going to just be white. So let's look back in our default view. Of course, I didn't grab all of these polygons here. All right. So let's Control X to copy those out. Press N to create a new layer and Control V to put that in there. Now with both layers selected, we want to make sure that this seam ended up at the same piece, because once you cut them apart, it changes the tension that sort of runs across the subdivision surfaces. So let us make sure that we don't need to adjust that. So go into our edges mode here, and of course we need to do a minor adjustment. So hit L just to make sure we got the entire loop selected. And then we just want to adjust that right there. Okay. So I'm going to rename this one as cap. And I guess we could rename this one base. Alright, so now we're going to go in and start thickening this up and adding some of the details that are going to make this look a little more realistic. So we can temporarily disable our backdrop. And let's go in here to our default view. So I'm going to select the entire base. A lot of the packages that I saw when I was doing research on this have this indentation in the back, and I'm not sure if it's here because it helps the package stand up or if it reduces the volume or distributes the weight differently, but we're going to add that in there. So it's just going to hit Shift B to bevel this in, and we're going to come in, looks about 150 millimeters on that. And then I'm going to select this center polygon here, and I'm just going to move that up a little bit. So that's just going to create a nice little base detail for us on there. So now what we want to do is we want to thicken this so that we create sort of the inside and the outside thickness. So we're going to do that in Basic and just grab the Thicken tool. So we're going to click in here and we're going to drag that inward. So it's going to be negative 12 millimeters is how thick we want this. And you want to make sure that your scale is 100, and then just in case, I always increase the maximum smoothing really high, so I give it like 120 degrees. And for our purposes, that gives us the thickness of our packaging. So now we want to convert this area into the edges so we can tighten up this edge a little bit. So let's go hold down the control key. That gets us our boundary option up here. So we're going to convert our selection into the boundary. So that's going to give us this edge. Looks like it didn't give us both edges, so we'll just double click that outer one. Now in edge mode, let's grab the bevel. Want to make sure the edge shape is set to square. We're just going to click and drag. So we're going to give about 4 millimeters there on that. And then you can see if we temporarily turn off the wireframe that we get a nice sharp edge on the top of that looks like it's sort of manufactured material. So turn the wireframes back on. Now, when the top and the bottom snap together, you kind of get these little grooves inside that kind of help hold them together. It just uses pressure to sort of hold together since the two materials are somewhat flexible. So we're going to mimic that little lip that's an inside. So I'm just going to quickly add, do my loop slice here again. And for this one, I'm going to give it a count of 10. And we're just going to make those uniform. And I think I'm just going to come down a little bit here. Maybe that one, then skip 2 of them, and that one. Yeah, that looks good. And then I'm just going to press L to select the entire loop. And then I'm going to use the deform and push. Then I'm going to push those out. About 3 millimeters looks good. Now let us go ahead and select those polygon loops. And I'm going to scale those down a little bit just to make it a little bit more of a dimple. That's going to push out a little more. Do the same thing here. Select all of these loops. And then scale that. So let's see what that looks like if we turn it off. Alright, so yeah, that's giving me the detail I want. I just want a little bit that's sticking out there. Just a little tiny bump on that. So I think for our base, that is finished. So let's start and jump in and do our cap. Okay, so for modeling the cap, we're going to need some finer details added in here. So what I want to do is freeze this at its subdivision level to give me some finer polygons that's going to allow me to add in those little details. So first what I want to do, I'm going to hit escape a couple times, make sure nothing's selected, grab my cap, and then I'm going to go into the surface property form, and then I'm going to hit subdivision 2, and just for good measure, set the render level to 2 on that. Now I'm going to take that, I'm going to just go geometry and freeze. Keep these options there. So now if I turn on, you can see now I've frozen that at this higher level of polygons. So I'm actually going to then turn back on the Capmol Clark. So hit Shift Tab to smooth those guys again. And then I want to set this boundary rules to smooth all. And then I want to make 2 clones of this object. So this is going to help me make the little flip part of the lid. So I'm just going to go into items mode here. And I'm just going to hit Control D and Control D. And that'll give me 1, 2, 3 cap objects. And they should all be identical. So the first thing we're going to want to do is the flip cap is going to have a little thumb piece here that's going to allow your thumb to sort of get underneath it and flip it open. So we're going to model that in by selecting these 4 polygons. So you can see this runs right along this edge right here. And then in the center we're going to select these 4 polygons. Now for the flip top part, we're going to bevel that out. So hit Shift B to enable your bevel. We're going to come in about 10 millimeters. And then we're going to come out 10 millimeters. So that's going to be the little thumb bit that's going to come out. Now, this is going to be the intermediary one right here. So this one, we're going to hit Shift B and bevel. And we want to come in 10 millimeters on this one. And then we're just going to leave it at 10 millimeters. Now this is going to be the main lid section here, and this one's going to go down. This is going to be the bottom part where your thumb's going to push it. So again, hit Shift B, come in 10 millimeters, and then we're going to go back 8 millimeters. So you want to make sure that that one is accurate. So 8 on that. Okay, so that's what we have for that piece. So for this one, this is the one that's going to be the little flip top piece. So we're going to select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we want to go back 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to Control X to copy those out of the layer. Select all of those by double clicking on it and hitting delete, and then pasting that back in. Now we're going to come here, and I'm going to select the intermediary one, and I'm going to select the same polygons. And this one we want to move backwards 10 millimeters. Or excuse me, 12. So let's hit Shift B, click, and then we're just going to move that back exactly 12 millimeters. Negative 12 millimeters. Alright, and then Q to drop that. Now we're going to hit Control X to copy that. Now I'm going to go into this one, and this is the one where we went backwards. So again, select those same polygons. Now these ones I'm just going to delete out of here. So hit Control Delete, and then the ones we just pasted, I'm going to hit Control V and paste that in. Now I'm going to double click on here to select the loop for both of those. And I'm going to go to my edge because I want to connect those together. So I'm going to go to my edge and bridge and then click. And I just want one segment to connect those two elements together. So that will be good enough for what we need. Now select these polygons one last time, and we're going to create one more bevel inset on this. So Shift B to bevel. And one of the things in all of these bevel operations you want to ensure is that your group polygons is enabled. So if everything's beveling individually and you're having problems with that, that would be the setting that keeps these all treated as if they're a single polygon. So let's bring this in about 18 millimeters right there. I think that's going to create a little lip that's going to catch the upper flap when it comes down. So let's bevel that in and hit Shift Delete. Now let's grab this loop right here, and we're going to add in some edges that are going to sort of hold that edge there and tighten that up. So let's select two opposing polygons and hit L to get the loop. And then I want to go to my mesh edit and my loop slice. Change this to 2, and then we want this to be symmetry. So we want to put those right really close to the edge. It has it at 0.5%. So anything in that area under 5% I think is going to get you what you want. And that is looking really sharp. So you can see how these two pieces are going to end up fitting together, and that you're going to end up having a little thumb catch here that's going to allow you to open this package a little more easily. So we can even grab this edge right here and maybe push that out a few more. So to form, push that out maybe 4 millimeters. Very subtle little amount. So now we want to thicken this 12 millimeters, so go back to basic and thicken. Click in the viewport, and then we want to come down negative 12 millimeters on that, so that we have consistency with the thickness of the little ridge that we've just created. Now select that outside loop, and L to select the loop, and then Alt C. And then I'm just going to click to accept that exact same value that we had on the other one. So now you can see how those two pieces fit together nicely. So kind of an extra little detail that I want to add inside of here to kind of help to seal this element is I'm going to grab this edge underneath the lid. We can turn this off. So if you have your polygon edges visible, there's just this little edge now that's created right inside of here, inside the thumb indentation. So let's go here to edge and slide that back a little bit. Slide it back just a little bit, maybe that much. Q to drop the tool. Now we're going to go to this extrude, and I'm going to give that about 4.5, maybe 5 millimeters of width. And then we're going to push that down. No, push that out. About 14 millimeters, 12 to 14 millimeters there. And then I don't like these ingons that this creates, so I'm going to select this vertex here and then select this one, and then we're going to go to the vertex and we're going to join those. So we don't want them average, we're just going to click OK. And what that does is it takes the first selected item and it moves it to the position of the second selected. So let's join those as well. So you see that just creates kind of a nice little edge underneath there, so that when this is open for the final rendering, it just adds a little nice detail that makes it a little more believable. So I think that portion of the lid is complete. So now the thing we need to do is we need to connect this piece into the lower base. So I'm going to just select this loop here, and I'm going to hit P. That's just going to give me one big flat polygon. If we look at the right view here, I can hit Shift B here to bevel that, and we want to come in. So we want to come smaller. What direction are we coming here? Yeah, we want to come inward. So we're going to come 12 millimeters. And then we're going to hit Shift and then click again to create a new bevel. And this one's going to come down. Oh, definitely not that far. I don't know, about 94. So now if we hit delete, we'll see where that edge is going to end up. So I think that looks pretty good. Let's grab this bottom edge, and we're going to have to look at this from the front view. So since we're coming straight down here on this, I want to scale this just a little bit, and we want to make sure to scale all axes, and it's only going to scale it a tiny little bit. So 99 is probably too much, so if we get the gang edit, set that to equal, and then hold down the control key, we can actually come in a little bit on that. So it looks like 99.53 is the magic number on that. And then we want to select, I'm going to add some subdivisions in here. So Alt C, let's get the 10 in here. Make sure that those are all uniform. All right. Q to drop. And then we're going to select this loop of polygons right here. Jump around and look at that, hit loop. And then I'm going to select the boundary of that again. And we're going to go to the edge and put that square edge holding bevel in there to make that nice and sharp. So I think we had about 3.5 or 4 millimeters last time. So now we want to kind of create the little indentations that these other guys are going to snap into, so we can slide those so they sort of coincide with that. And then we want to do the deform and push, but we're going to push inward this time. So maybe slide another edge here. kind of hard to see where our edges are. I'm going to save. We haven't saved in a little while. We want to turn off the base. There we are. Slide him down. Alright, so let's push him in. Deform, push. Edge slide. And then another edge slide. Probably just remove this edge altogether right there. Alright, so that gets us the little sort of pressure ridge that's going to hold this top and this bottom together when they get pressed apart. So now we want to add overall thickness to this entire object. And since we have some of these details in here, it's going to end up interpenetrating itself. So we're going to fix that. And again, like I said, this isn't going to be the manufactured object, so we can just kind of fix it so that it's not visible in the render, but it's not something that is going to be perfectly clean geometry in this particular case. So going into polygons mode, want to select all of our object, and then we're going to go into that thicken tool here, and then we can just, that's -12, we want it to match what we did before, so I'm just going to click apply on that. And then I want to tighten up this edge right here. So loop again, and Alt-C, and we want 2, symmetry, and then something again under 5%. So something like that. Gives us a nice sort of believable detail. So now I said there was going to be some weird geometry, and that's mostly right here. So if we deselect these, you can see this backwards facing polygon is sort of coming outwards because they're intersecting with each other. So if we go here to local action center, we can kind of move those inward. Maybe grow that a little bit. You can see how it's completely sort of folded in on itself when we thickened that. I'm going to deselect this row right here, and I am going to smooth this all out. So that kind of creates much nicer geometry inside of there, and it doesn't interpenetrate anymore, and it gives us a nice looking package cap there. So the one final thing we have to do is we want to connect this element to our other lid piece. So we made this piece right here, so we want to connect these two objects together. So we're going to take this and we're going to move this an exact amount. We don't want local. Set that back to none. So let's try moving that out. Say maybe -500 millimeters. Enter on that. Q to drop. Now we're going to Control X, and we want to copy this into our cap layer. So Control V. Now, in order to connect these, there's going to be a very thin little bit of plastic that holds these two elements together. So I'm going to make that by loop slicing this again. And we only want one. So it's basically going to cut it in half. And we're going to create the same loop slice on this half over here. Alt-C, click. All right, now these two center upper ones here, this one and that one, are going to connect to the exact same corresponding pieces here. 1 and 1. Those aren't the corresponding ones. Those are. All right. So we have those two pieces there. So then we want to go into Polygon, Bridge, and then I'm just going to accept the defaults on that and then just bridge those two elements together. So you can see it gets really, really stretched, but we're going to move that back into place in just a second. The first thing we want to do is we need to create a vertex weight map in here so that we're going to use this as an animation element later on to swing this lid open and close without having to select the polygons. Let's go into the list here. We're going to set weight map, and then we're going to create a new one. This is going to be called cap flip, I think is a good name. And we're going to click OK, and then we can go here to our vertex map, and we want to select all of these guys. And then we're going to go to vertex map, set value, and we're going to set this to weight. We're going to set that to a value of 0. Okay. So now that we have those separated out, we can take this and we can move it back, and we want to move that back, that exact same number, the 500 millimeters. That is why we memorized that number. All right, and there is our finished cap. Look back at default. All right, so now we have our cap and our base complete. So there's one more detail. If we look back at our backdrop image here, and we'll look back into it, there's this cellophane shrink wrap label that goes around the outside of that. So next we're going to make a cylinder, and we're going to shrink wrap that around the outside of our object. Alright, so the last thing we need to do here is we're going to do the cellophane wrapping that goes around the outside of this. So that's going to require us to do another layer of polygons around the entire outside of this. But first, we want to make a background constraint item with which we can work against. So I'm going to copy both of these elements, Control C, make sure we're in polygons mode here, Control C, and then we're going to go in here, Control V. Now I want to make sure that the bottom is frozen to the same level as this one. So we're going to go here to geometry. I just double checked to make sure subdivision level was at 2, so we're just going to go to freeze. And then I'm going to click OK. So now those have a consistent polygon size on both of those. And then I'm going to subdivide both of them one more time. So hit Shift D and then create that Catmull Clark. And then I'm going to hit Shift T to triangulate all of those so that we know that we have 100% flat background constraint. So this is just going to be the constraint on that. We can call this the cello wrap on there. We can put our base and the cap up there. We don't need them. And make this one visible. Alright, so cello wrap and background constraint. So let's delete these guys. We don't need them. Control S to save our scene. So let's turn back on that backdrop really quick. Looks like it's already on. So the way we're going to create this is we're going to just take the cylinder and we're going to sort of vacuum form that against the background. So we want to just generate our cylinder here. It's the wrong orientation. Just make sure that that's bigger than what we need. Make sure that that's at 0 on the X and Z. And then we can just go into the front view here and then make sure, maybe we need to turn off this constraint item. So let's move this up right there. And then let's scale it from there. Alright, so those two lines define the top and the bottom of our cello wrap edges. So that looks really good right there. And then I'm going to delete this top and this bottom cap on here because they are unnecessary for our purposes. And then I'm going to subdivide this one more time, I think, just to get a little smaller polygons in here. Alright, so let's turn our background constraint on. Now, in order to enable background constraint, we can do that by holding down the control key. And that turns our snapping into this constraint button here. So if we click on that, we're going to turn on background constraint. And from there, we want to make sure the geometry constraint is set as vector. And I think I'm going to give this an offset of 2 millimeters on that. So with all those polygons selected, we're going to go to deform now, and we're going to go push. And we want to push that right against that background element. So that was a negative 350 millimeters to get that on there. And then we want to make sure that that is a subdivision surface object. So you can see we're kind of penetrating a little bit on here, but sometimes the 3D viewport can be a little bit deceiving. So I want to open up a preview on this, drag this in from my other monitor, kind of see what this is going to look like here. So it can really help if we give this a unique color. So let me give this cello wrap. We'll give this like a red color. Make that very obvious. So yeah, you can see that it's penetrating quite a bit on there. So what we want to do is clean up that penetration. I'm going to make this square so we can see more clearly here. So it seems like mostly on these corners is where it's penetrating. So I'll just select that as a loop. Select all of these corners maybe. Come on. All right, and we're going to get our push tool. Push outward there. So we just want to make it so that it's just beyond where it's penetrating. So maybe if we select the center edge now. See, the problem is that each vertex sort of lies against that backdrop element there. But the polygons themselves, you know, it might be penetrating across there. So even though the vertices might be laying on that surface, the polygons kind of spread across. So by pushing this out, all right, so maybe these last corners here is the last of it. And get those four corners, push it just again. All right, that looks like that is the last of the penetration. All right, so now we're going to take this cello wrap and we're actually going to UV map that. So let's close our preview, jump into our UV edit. So you can see that since that was a cylinder, it had the two caps up at the top here. We're just going to do a quick UV projection, cylindrical on the Y, and just keep that at automatic. Clip in the viewport, and that'll fill this entire UV space with it. So that's really all we need to do with that. So now the one last operation we're going to do here in model is we're going to thicken this guy. We're going to make this actual geometry that's going to have a front and back face with thickness. So it's going to basic and thicken. Click in there, and we're only going to thicken this 2 millimeters because it's a very thin little cellophane wrapping for the outside edge. So I think we are done with all of the modeling. So we have our cello wrap, and we have our base, and we have our cap. Look at all of those together. So I'm going to save my object here. I think we can turn off our constraint item, or actually just delete that if you like. Okay, so that's everything about the modeling. So this was basically just taking very simple geometry and sort of breaking it down. And then we used the bevel tool multiple times, loop slice, to add in some of those finer details. And then finally, we use the background constraint to shrink wrap a cello wrapper around the outside of our package. So that pretty much completes all of the modeling for the training. So next up, what we're going to do is we're going to be applying surfaces to this object so that we can create a realistic looking object. And then we still need to model the candy. So we're going to be modeling the fruit bite pieces themselves. It's going to be very straightforward to do that. And then we're going to be doing some dynamic simulations to fill up this package so that we can get it to look like the comp for what we're going to be using this for. Hope you've been enjoying it thus far. So in the next video, we will continue with the surfacing for the packaging.